Hey guys, and welcome back into the Out of Our Minds podcast. This is Nikki here, and you are tuning in to episode 10. Now, before we dive into the episode, I just want to give a quick little intro on what it is you can be expecting. Essentially, this episode is all about the topic of dealing with darkness in our society and how we can no longer fight darkness with more darkness. We can no longer fight fear with more fear, divide with more divide. And the reason why we are talking about this topic is because there have been drops in the media lately of people getting COVID again and rumors spreading about another lockdown. And we have no freaking idea what's actually going to happen. But Bella and I both have been receiving these really strong messages in our channel that it's time to spread the message of how it is we can best navigate dealing with this darkness for the round 2 or whatever it is that may happen. And I'm not saying all this to induce fear. The episode is to evoke a sense of empowerment. That is the goal of this episode. When we go through any sort of awakening journey, whether it be on a collective scale or personal scale, we go through something called the dark night. This is where we're visiting the shadows. We're getting to know the darkness. A lot of times people will fall into depressive states in life. And it's really important that when you're down there in the darkness, that you're actually there knowing that it's there to guide you towards your next step. It's there to show you your power. It's there to turn you inwards. Now, when we went through this dark night as a collective in 2020, we fell into the freaking darkness. There was so much fear, so much divide, so much anger, so much hatred. And it was really important for us to go through that chapter. But now that we're at this different state of consciousness and we're in this elevated state of consciousness, we get to, as a society, navigate that darkness from a completely different angle. Instead of falling into the narratives and feeding into the fear and into the divide, which I myself still catch myself there, like this is the information we're sharing is stuff we're both still working through too. And instead of falling into those narratives, it's time to rise above it. It's time to actually see it from a completely new angle and a completely new way of understanding. Now that we're understanding this shift in consciousness, we can see that everything that happened in 2020 happened in a very divine and perfect way. It all happened for us to really wake the F up. And now that we're awake and we're aware, and maybe there's a round 2 that's coming, we have no idea, it is time to navigate this from a different angle. And this is exactly what we're going to dive into in this episode. How does that look? What do we do? How do we actually shift our consciousness and get out of the mode of fear and into the mode of love and unity? So I'm going to leave that there. We dive into so much. We do a little recap on what happened in 2020. We dive into this topic of groupthink. And it is really freaking interesting. If you are landing here listening to this, trust that this episode has found you for a reason. Trust that you are meant to listen to the messages. If you don't resonate with what we're saying, that is totally okay. If you don't agree with our opinions, that is totally okay too. And even though this has been uncomfortable for us to dive into the depths of our opinions and what we truly believe, it is something that is so needed. It's something that is so needed amongst our collective to talk about openly. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you guys have been enjoying listening to the podcast, feel free to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube, throw a tap on that subscribe button. And yeah, let's get into the episode. What's up, guys? I'm Nikki.
I'm Bella. And this is the Out of Our Minds podcast, a playground for mystics and self-explorers to journey through the vast realms of the universe, cultural landscapes, and spiritual expansion.
Join us weekly as we dive into thought-provoking discussions that unveil the mysteries of existence and nurture the growth of our consciousness.
So yeah, today's topic and conversation definitely is very timely and in tune with collective sentiments, with cultural movements, trends, the news, media. It definitely feels. Today is August 30th, 2023, for reference. And yeah, August, I think just in the past few weeks, there's just been kind of like some bubbling of like, okay, we're thinking about basically everything we learned through the previous COVID era, everyone who had a spiritual awakening, people who are just aware, they're living their dreams, they're like, we're doing it, we're high vibe beings. And now all of a sudden we're like, oh fuck, darkness, like this thing is still existing. Like there still seems to be quote unquote bad things happening in the world. And I put it in quotes because that's something that we're about to get into. But yeah, it feels like people really need and are craving this reminder and kind of this like debrief and discussion, like what do we do, like what's happening, like how do we make sure that we are maintaining the light but we're also not afraid of the dark, like how do we navigate all these intricacies that are so important and really inevitable to the human experience. And Nikki and I basically started to feel the same way. We're kind of sending each other different posts from people and just being like, hey, did you hear about this? And it became very obvious that there was kind of this sprinkle of like doubt or fear creeping in of like, wow, like, you know, who would have thought that maybe we were going to be dealing with some like new levels of darkness coming in or current events or whatever. And so, yeah, the point is we're excited to talk today because we've both, as usual, as you can count on us for doing the research, we've gone down different, just pathways of learning different concepts from psychology, from spirituality, philosophy, current events, etc., to just understand and bring to you guys a really in-depth, well-covered conversation on navigating darkness with the light and really kind of moving out of fear. I think for me feels like a big one of just not falling again into what happened a couple of years ago with the world ending and darkness coming to light and oh my god, all this stuff that happened, and we all sort of freaked out for a bit and then we took our power back. So how do we continue with having our power intact? That's kind of the premise of this chat.
And I feel like we can get into some detail here and talk about what we're referring to with this darkness. And everyone probably knows what we're alluding to, but just the government
let's just
control.
Be clear. Let's just be
no more encrypted.
I'm over it. I've been doing this 10-day subconscious reprogramming. Terminate. We're gonna talk about this another note, but it's like 10 days into terminate. We don't give a fuck. Okay, we say what we think, and that's it. Done deal. Moving on. If you can't handle that, best of luck.
Yes. So essentially what this conversation is about is obviously with COVID and everything that happened, there was this really huge shift in consciousness that occurred when people started to wake up to a lot of the darkness that has been kind of running the show with our government and the way that our society is ran. And we started to realize that, holy shit, like there needs to be a big change for us to be able to make this positive shift in society. And that journey of realizing that darkness was really fucking painful for everyone, right? And it became a lot less painful when we started to realize that we didn't have to identify with all of that bullshit, and we started to kind of like shift into this different paradigm of living. And I don't know what like your approach was during those times, but I chose to really tune into my own discernment and make choices based on what actually felt true to me, and to really take time to not just flow with the crowd, but to really tune into, okay, what truly feels right for me and what decisions do I want to make. And what we're alluding to with the darkness coming back for another round is there's been like drops in the media that COVID is going to have another round. And I see it in my feed with the people that I follow and everyone that's in this community of people banding together and choosing to approach this from a completely new level of consciousness and a new approach with their energy. So I feel like when we first were hit with this big awakening of like, okay, this is something that's really in our society, this is something that's happening, everyone was angry and mad and really falling into those lower vibrations of just feeling the resentment and the hurt and the betrayal.
Because we were so in it too. Like it was so fresh and personal, and like, God, do I have many stories of like the shit that went down and things that happened to me that made it really hard to focus on, you know, moving forward. So yeah, totally. And that's like, we spoke about this in one of the other episodes, but like that was our dark night. And
that's a part of the process, is to fall into the darkness and really get to know it on a deep level. But with the second wave that's happening, we have to band together and choose to step into a different level of consciousness and a different vibration in order to really start making some serious changes here. And this is why we are talking about this topic now. And this is why you're going to see a lot more people talk about this topic, because we cannot fight darkness with more darkness. We cannot fight divide with more divide. We cannot fight hatred with more hatred. We have to make a change here that is actually going to cause a shift in the energy. So
Yes.
that is why I'm feeling so passionate about this, because I do not want to go down the road of further divide, further hatred, further judgment. I think there's another way that we can go about this.
Absolutely. And I already have full body chills, which makes me feel like this is this is already hitting. Yeah, what's really coming to me now is reflecting back to you spoke to this, your personal experience with what it was like to realize what was really going on. And two important points are coming up that I want to share. One is that for me, the why behind having this conversation is very, very potent for me, because here's the thing. No matter what your opinion was, how you walked away from the way that the news, media, the government, etc., went about dealing with this crisis, right? A crisis that felt very real, was very real in many ways, right? At the same time, we know that the consequences of groupthink and falling into line because of fear, etc., tribalism, which are all concepts we're going to break down a little bit, the consequence of that is actually in nobody's favor, because in reality, if and when the next quote unquote bad thing starts to happen to us, right? Bad things happen, news hits, something occurs in our world. In order for us to navigate those properly, we actually need the dissent. We need the disagreement. We need the ability to hold space and bring light into these scenarios. And why I get so passionate about this is because, like Nikki, like anyone listening to this, I guarantee you experience firsthand what happens when communities and families and a world that is so afraid and so quick to jump to the quickest solution, the quickest thing that feels good, how badly that ends up for everyone involved. Families ripped apart, people not speaking to each other, being coerced into medical decisions, losing their jobs, being banned off of social media, which is their livelihood, like families who did not even have the means to say no and were forced into things, right? We need to talk about those things, and we need to pull from that experience to say, it's okay if you even walked out of the pandemic and still agree with everything that was the mainstream perspective. That is fine. However, are you willing to listen to the other side? Because that is what we missed. That is what the collective did not do. And that is what caused the fear and the irrational thoughts. And also, just to say, if you do the research and you go down the rabbit hole and you use your discernment, oftentimes we arrive at different opinions. You can't just say, trust the experts. The experts disagree on things. So I want to kind of give that bigger picture of like, why does this even matter? And, to be clear that it's not that I'm saying, the opinion that I arrived at after this is the only right one and I want to put that back into the world. No, what I'm saying is we need to reassess how everyone is benefited by the idea of bringing the light into darkness, because the darkness includes your own fear, your own, nerves about what's going to happen to you, the health of yourself and your family. Like, it is all included in that. And so this is for everyone. And I really want to make that clear, because that is what broke my heart in 2020, 21, 22, is that it was actually out of love that I wanted to have these conversations. And it resulted in so much loss and grief and destruction that it really broke my heart. And I know that the way to move forward, whether it's another lockdown or another pandemic bullshit, like the way to approach that is going to be with light for everyone, not just for our own opinions.
Yeah. And what does that light actually look like to us? Because it's not like we're coming at this saying, okay, we need to band together and fight harder. No, I almost see it as we get to utilize this opportunity as a chance to gain a stronger relationship to our own intuition and to our own discernment and to our own inner being. And I think the topics we're going to talk about today with groupthink and everything that we've done the research on, it's all about moving into the future and whatever there is to come with just a stronger stance on how it is you will make decisions in your life, and
Yes.
who it is you allow to tell you what is the right thing for you, and just use your own critical thinking to take a beat and to think about, is there some sort of motive behind what is being told to me? Is there some sort of agenda behind what is being told to me? How can I actually sit down and feel out in my body what truly feels right to me? And I texted you the other day that I actually had a conversation with one of my friends at dinner that really just like hit me because it really put things in perspective. We were just reflecting on how crazy it was that everyone just ran and got these vaccines. And then all of a sudden there's this fight of like anti-vaxxers versus vaxxers. And anyone who's an anti-vaxxer also is anti-abortion and is racist. And people that are getting vaccinated are pro-abortion. It's just so crazy how that is how our mind was thinking. It wasn't like, oh, let's see, is this person just making the decision based on what they believe is right for them? No, they're automatically in this box of being X, Y, and Z. But it's just crazy to think about, like, so many people ran and got these vaccines without even taking a moment to think about it because they were so gung-ho about being on the right side.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this brings up why inherently this is a spiritual, mental, emotional issue. Because essentially, like, what the core of this, like, let's say if there's anything we want people to take away, it's the whole process of discernment, critical thinking, even intuition, checking in with yourself, what you really believe, holding to your values. That whole process is derailed by fear, right? And rage and anger and resentment. And so this is why what's actually fascinating is to look at what those set of emotions essentially do when they really like poison entire communities or people or groups or however they label themselves, right? Just people in general when they're pierced by that. And something we could bring up now is these ideas of groupthink and conformity. And essentially, when people reflected back onto what it looked like when crowds or masses of people fell into this form of group thinking or being so driven by fear that they were unable to discern and to take in new information. And this is like the crux of how so many things went wrong, is because people allowed themselves to be in a fear mindset that completely blocked them from being rational, which is that's what happens, right? Anybody who is in an excessive state of fear for too long, right? This is like outside of proper fear processes, right? Where like there's a lion coming at you, or you like literally just heard about some bad news or whatever it is, there's a natural reaction of fear. But we know that prolonged states of fear are not natural and normal. And when you're in them, it completely blocks your ability to think clearly. And that is what happened to masses and masses of people, which is what created these like tribal feelings of like us versus you, like you're the problem, anything you do is wrong, and like we're a one group, and if somebody in our group doesn't agree, like they gotta go because it threatens our safety.
Yeah. Anytime now that there is a narrative out there that is causing divide, take a second look at it.
Yeah.
Take a second look at it, because this is not about further divide. Like, we need to just start realizing that we are all one, first of all. And this idea of separation is so deep rooted within our society that causes us to actually be in this vibration of fear. And this is what Marianne Williams was just saying in that podcast that I was listening to, that separation causes that fear is the result of separation, and that love is the result of unity. So when we come together and start to realize our oneness and really start taking action from that angle of love and oneness, that is when we're going to see the biggest shifts. and to shift out of that vibration of fear. Whether you're on the freaking right or the left, there's fear on both sides of that, right? How can we actually see above this and start to take action from that place? So, yeah, let's dive into this topic of groupthink and start to dissect this a bit.
Yeah. So, okay, I think we should start with group think because this is such a great concept to wrap your mind around. And I think as we read like the definitions of it, the examples, like it's going to start to make some things click, especially in terms of what we saw in the past, and then we can basically keep an eye out for right now in the future as we navigate really anything in life. So, groupthink, I'll read the definition from Psychology Today. And again, guys, of course, we're going to link our articles and research in the show notes. So if you want to dive in, check our sources, etc., please go for it. So, groupthink is a phenomenon that occurs when a group of well-intentioned people makes irrational or non-optimal decisions spurred by the urge to conform or the belief that dissent is impossible. The problematic or premature consensus that is characteristic of groupthink may be fueled by a particular agenda, or it may be due to group members valuing harmony and coherence above critical thought. So, right away, really, just to understand this phenomenon is what we're talking, it's exactly what we've just talked about for this entire time up until now, is this phenomenon of people who are well-intentioned, which is incredibly important to remember, is all beings are seeking love, right? Even if we're afraid, we want safety, we want to feel okay, we want to feel loved and secured in our group, right? We want our family to be safe. Very good intentions. But of course, it results in bad decision making or forcing other people to agree with the group for the sake of harmony, which we can also equate to fitting in, right? The tribal nature that can kind of blindside us is this behavior of thinking in a narrow way because we want to stay true to the group, right? This happens in families all the time. And this is what we saw was families wanting to be safe and take care of each other. And all of a sudden a family member does something differently and it feels legitimately scary in a biological way because it feels threatening. So it's all valuing the coherence and harmony above critical thought, which is very problematic in a society where you want to be able to get to the truth, right? What's actually going on? Like, is this in our best interest? Should we be going another way? And the irony, honestly, is that the type of harmony and like coherence that is achieved by groupthink, I feel is so, it's
dangerous.
The opposite effect. What'd you say?
Dangerous.
Yes, it's dangerous for sure. But I also think deep down it's actually not harmonious because I think, if people within the group are staying silent or self-censoring, that is not harmonious and is not in the interest of the group, right? In the long term, like things will come to light and people will realize that it's not healthy to be doing this, nor is it actually in the best interest of truth or what we should do to solve problems.
Right. No, it's definitely not harmonious because if you think about it, you have people muting themselves that don't actually agree, that feel like they can't speak out because if they do, they'll be shunned or canceled. And then that creates people having these like silent movements underneath where you start to have further divide of the you versus me, right? And that is not harmonious at all. And I think something that really stuck out to me with the group think is this idea, where was it? I just had it. I think the most dangerous part that I'm thinking about and just reflecting on like what happened was they were so quick to jump on the bandwagon and to outwardly express and show their devotion to one of the sides in an attempt to feel a part of something, you know? And I think that is really freaking dangerous. And to think about it on both sides too.
For sure.
I lost my thought there, what I was saying, but that was something else that just popped up.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's basically seeking a sense of safety in the external. Like you're basically putting like your group identity and belonging above actually honoring yourself or digging deeper, right? Like what you're getting at is it's the external world becoming more important and viewing these things that are not from within, right? So you're always looking outside of you for the feeling of belonging, for the feeling of acceptance, when we know that the best way to find those is actually internally. And when you do find it internally, you are not as susceptible to conformity and groupthink because you have arrived at your own sense of safety and wholeness, that you're not looking to achieve it from somebody else. And
Right.
I think what you're getting at too is this happens no matter the group, right? I remember very vividly, I think maybe this was 2022, so it's just like a couple of years into all this era, and realizing that okay, now because there's this big movement on that you could call health freedom or like the conscious movement, right? Health freedom was like a big movement name that kind of developed. There was like an organization that kind of brought people together under this guise of like honoring people's body autonomy, allowing for freedom. They kind of brought to light like a lot of the false information that the mainstream was bringing forward. And I started to realize that, okay, this is also a group. This is also an identity. And we have to be careful that in those groups themselves, they don't fall into the same thing just because
Mm-hmm.
they had to do some critical thinking and leaving of one pack to get into another. And I remember vividly Alex Zek, who I think I've mentioned many times on the podcast because he is someone I got to know really well over uh the pandemic, and as I became a part of this health freedom community, that I remember he said, he was like, it's really important that we don't create our own echo chamber and our own version of conformity and groupthink just because we've all found each other based on, trying to get away from living in fear. That if we just bring those same behaviors back into this group, it's the same thing. And then it's like people again don't use critical thinking or their own intuition to discern what they agree with, and how important it is to know that a cohesive community and a harmonious group can and should include debate and dissent.
Right. As you were speaking, I almost visualize it in the sense of like, instead of viewing it on such a large scale with these large groups of people, to understand the angle that we're talking about it from, I feel like it helps to imagine just a room of, let's say, like 30 people. 10 of them are the people that are just listening to everything the government says, and they have created this group that just thinks in one singular notion. And then you have, let's say, another group of 10 people who have just band together and created another bubble of group think. And like you're saying, another echo chamber of just anything they say, it is wrong. We're going to do the
Right.
complete opposite of what they're saying. And then there's another option. There's this other group, these other 10 people. And they're viewing everything from the outside and just kind of observing it and
Mm.
not falling into the storylines of everything, but still taking a step back and really just thinking critically without having to approach it from the same level of consciousness. Like once you're in
Mm.
the storyline and you're sucked into the narrative, which like I have totally caught myself there, you're just feeding into the same energy, the same paradigm. And this
Mhm.
is what what's his name? Eric?
Alec?
Alec. Why do I always say Eric? Alec. This is what he was referencing when you sent me that post that he did the other day of just like creating your own paradigm outside of this,
Yes.
right?
So huge. Yes, what you're bringing up with this visualization, which is so powerful, is exactly what it looks like to create this new paradigm of dealing with darkness and issues and whatever the heck is happening in our life, in our lifetime, in the world. And it's that power of you have a sense of self where you are intact, you're good. Your nervous system is expansive, you can handle stress, right? You have developed a sense of self that is essentially bulletproof and is not reliant on any group or fitting in with the crowd, right? Hard to do, but possible. The second you start working towards that, that's huge, right? Just the awareness of our own pull to conform. So this is exactly it. This is how the solution comes to mind when we say, okay, a piece of news comes out and they say, oh my God, headline that's whatever, insert a bunch of scary fear words and that we have to do this and like we're all fucked, whatever, okay? That comes out and immediately you're going to have probably those two groups, the first two groups, one being like, oh my God, time to panic. Like if they're saying it's happening, then it's got to be true and I got to figure this out and I'm freaking out. Second group, jumping to disagreeing, fighting it, and working themselves up to prove why the other one is wrong.
Still panicking.
Still panicking. Exactly. And this is the illusion of thinking that, you know, if you used to be a left winger and then you switch to be a right winger, that all of a sudden, like, you're good, you've broken out of the matrix. It's the same thing. If you went from right to
the other side.
No, you just jump to another tribe, which, you know, obviously there's exceptions, but generally, as we see it, that is the same thing. If you're just jumping to still coming from that lack mentality, that fear of, oh my God, they must know, I need to prove them wrong. They need to know that they're wrong, right? It's that same sticky, darker, just like that energy that is still very attached and tethered to what's happening. And the idea is we want to be untethered. We want to be detached from these scenarios so we can see clearly, we can think clearly, we can access our own intuition, and we can stay open, heart-led to figure out the solution, right? So like the examples are lately we've been seeing this news, right? And I can't think of a particular news story, but there's just been things people have been sharing of like more lockdowns coming, or Biden ordered 5 million more vaccines to ship out, like all this stuff coming out, right? And you're like, what does it mean? Like what's going on? What do I do about this? And in those moments, I've noticed that I really try and say, okay, like I'm good. Like, let me maintain the state that I'm in. Like if I'm in a calm state sitting on my couch and I see something, someone sends me something, or Nikki sends me a link to an article, checking in that moment how you initially react is a really good indicator of where you're at in this sort of spectrum of being incredibly reactive to things versus being able to stay neutral and then respond, right? So that's kind of like where this solution starts to come in, is at first, as we're processing information, how important it is. And we really cannot underestimate the power of this individual process, of the things that it sounds like we're being a dead horse, but like the working on yourself, the healing, the meditation, the contemplation, the seeking out other perspectives, right? Expanding your worldview, expanding your heart, doing the things every day that truly keep you healthy on all levels, right? It's the polar opposite of when people go into fight or flight and innately are unhealthy and stressed out because they're in that state and then they can't make decisions.
Right. And also like those three groups of people, it's like those two that are activated in that dysregulated state are never going to be able to solve any problems. And maybe it takes that third group to come in with the regulated nervous system and to say like, hey, like, what are you guys thinking? How you feeling? Like, what's going on here? Tell me how you're feeling.
Exactly. Exactly. See, because that's also led from understanding. It's led from a place of, I would just like to understand. I'm not coming here to tell you anything about my opinion quite yet, unless you want to know. Tell me what's going on with you. And that's the catalyst that helps people to ask questions and to reference back to themselves, right?
Right. And I even catch myself going back and forth between the reaction and the response. This is something I'm still working on. Like even me reposting that story the other day of like the clown emoji. Definitely
we had several voice notes over this one.
Definitely a reactive post that I did. But I think I've really tapped out of that world for a very long time. And now that it's coming up again, I'm like, oh, hell no, not this again. And I caught myself being like super reactive. But then I started seeing all this beautiful messaging around everything that we're talking about now. And I'm like, oh, okay. There's a completely different approach that we get to take this time. And it's going to be a journey of me really stepping into that energy. But I already feel such a shift, even from doing this podcast and from reading a lot of the information that I've been reading and listening to podcasts that I'm listening to. And I already feel so much more in my power from taking this angle, because if you want to speak about it from more of like a dark versus light perspective as well, it's like I truly believe deep in my core that everything has this very particular order to it and everything happens for a reason. And that all of the darkness and the struggles that we face as a society is just us being pushed to wake the fuck up and shift into a different level of consciousness. And we've spoken about this before, but even COVID was just a really massive wake up call for everyone. And we're still going through, like, the world and society is still going through their dark night. And now we're at the phase where we're not identifying with the emotions anymore. We're not identifying with the fears. We're starting to really rise above. And that's where we get to choose how things outside of ourselves impact us, and to realize that we are the ones who get to make the choices and to not feel so powerless. Because when you're looking at the three groups of people, the two that are dysregulated and still coming from that angle of fear, it doesn't matter what side you're on, you're giving your power away. You're saying that something outside of me has control over me. And if you want to shift into a different paradigm, you have to understand that we all are creating our reality and we all are creating this experience. And our vibration and the energy that we carry is our contribution to the collective. And that's not my quote, it's someone else's. I don't know who it is, but that is a very powerful thing to know, that you get to make the changes within yourself that you want to see in the world. So if you're ready to see more love and unity, then that is our work to turn inwards and start creating that love and unity within ourselves, and then also within the community that is around us. And I'm not saying that I'm doing this perfectly, but I am saying that this is something that I'm consistently diving into, and now I'm going to work on at even a deeper level, to really love where people are at and to understand that everyone is just navigating this fucking chaotic time in our society from their best level of understanding, and that we can all help each other understand just by approaching each other with compassion, non-judgment, and really starting to see each other from that lens of unity.
Yeah, it's really so important, and it's really hard to do because I mean, we're just not really taught at all like how to do that. And also just because even when you do that, you can still of course deal with people or scenarios that are going to bring, anger or frustration back to you. And that's where, going back to our whole mirrors episode, last episode was about mirrors, is just like understanding that, you know, yes, the truth is like you will still, when you come into a situation with love and expansion and light and trying to understand and being open minded, of course, there's going to be people who are, still frustrated, or they're going to write it off because they're going to see you the way that they see themselves and they're going to be frustrated by it. And this is, again, what so many people probably experienced throughout the pandemic and their awakening, whatever was going on, was if they shared something, they were really faced with like an aggressive reaction that felt so unwarranted, especially if they were trying to come from a place of love, right? A place of like, I want everyone to be safe and healthy, and I don't want anybody to get hurt. And I'm trying to bring more nuance to this topic for that purpose. But because you're going to be a mirror for other people that are operating in fear, like that is what will happen, right? But of course, the more that we focus on the love light energy, the better, because obviously it would be way worse if we are again in that same lower vibration of fear, shame, whatever it is, just being so angry and upset that we don't give other people the opportunity to soften and open up and come at it with a different consciousness.
Right. And I think it is worth talking about, like, how do we actually, we know that we can't fight darkness with more darkness, but like, what does that even mean for us at this point in time? Like, okay, that sounds all woo-woo and pretty and nice, but like, how do we actually integrate that into our society? And listening to Marianne
Williamson.
Marianne Williamson, yeah. So she, for anyone who doesn't know, is running for president. She is the author of many books, but her most popular one being A Return to Love, which is pretty much her summary on A Course in Miracles and how that impacted her life. It's a really fucking powerful book. And I just listened to a podcast where she was speaking about her presidency and what she believes would be the greatest source of change in our society. And she approaches it from this angle of fierce love. Like, it is time for us to not just sit on the side. And she refers to this like conscious community as we, because she's talking to the podcast host who is very much in this community of elevating the collective consciousness. And she said, okay, like, we have done it. We've elevated the consciousness, but we can't just sit on the sidelines anymore. We have to go in and do something about it. And to take the angle of approach of like, okay, we're not all attacking each other, but let's go in and start to actually bring some curiosity and understanding into these situations and start to actually make changes from that angle. So yeah, I loved this approach of fierce love, because she's tough. Like, if you listen to that podcast, like she doesn't like sit back and just take shit from anyone, but she's understanding that it's time for change. So it's time for us to make moves, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I think she maybe talks about this because you were sending me some notes on it. Like, even the whole we thing of like, obviously, practically speaking, for the purposes of understanding a group of people, that makes sense to say like spiritual community or like conscious individuals or health freedom people. But I think what's interesting there is to also recognize, again, like how quick and easy it is to go back to being tribal beings and to identify with a group. And I mean, I'm for sure guilty of it, but I think it's another small piece of this is to just recognize all the ways that we put ourselves into boxes and labels for whatever reason, right? Like, whether it's because you actually find a lot of alignment and joy in that group, amazing. Like, that's fantastic. And recognizing that we have to know when that might backfire on us to make us again fall into us versus them, and to separate ourselves from other people, which again, we're here to remember that all is one. Like, there is a oneness that is so true and so important to this lifetime to understand. And I really think, like, at least for me personally, one of my biggest life lessons is this journey of remembering the oneness and remembering the truth of that. And every time we section ourselves off and differentiate ourselves from other people, again, understanding the practicality of that, understanding that it can be in all good faith, that again, the end goal here, the last part of the sentence, is to remember the oneness, and that I think is what actually catapults you into bringing the light, bringing the fierce love, right? What she's saying, I think is aligned with this in the end, is if you really are a conscious, aware, loving being like you say you are and like you believe you are and like you really, really are, go and act on that and embody it and forget your labels, forget your opinions, and go out there to actually bring that realistically to other people through your actions, through your energy. Like, that shit really matters. And I told this in the episode that came out this week. I told the whole story about what happened at my workplace when I was like chose to be authentic and tell the truth, and that people picked up on my energy of being truthful and authentic and really honoring myself, and it made a difference. It really did. And it's in those actions that things change. And it's when you choose to invite your uncle to sit down and talk to you about XYZ and ask him questions, right? And use productive disagreement or whatever it is to get to the bottom of things and understand each other, not to win the argument, not to say I told you so, right? To understand. I think that's probably what she's getting at.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about like the we thing and how that is just kind of saying what I don't know, she was saying that like we shouldn't be dividing, but then it was a lot of like we language, and I noticed that as well. Because it's really important to, I don't know, it's hard to do this, but to not put groups of people in the category of like darkness, you know, and to instead see darkness as this infiltration of people being run by their egos instead of the people themselves, you know, and to see the darkness as like, even if you were to, let's say, get into a fight with someone at the supermarket and all of a sudden this person starts yelling at you, if you wanted to fight darkness with darkness, you'd be like, hey, F you, like, you just knocked over my peas, like, pick them up. And instead, if you were to approach that from this angle of understanding and compassion, and to actually just see, okay, this person's not a bad person for being angry and yelling at me. They are just maybe dealing with shit in their own life, or dealing with darkness in their head, or intrusive thoughts, or anxiety, or maybe someone just passed away in their family. Like, you never know. And there's this separation of the darkness being just the person, and instead seeing people as like their true soul self, because we are all creations of this universal consciousness, God, love, whatever it is you want to call it. And when we start to see people from that angle, that's when we actually get curious to see the understanding aspect of it. It's not just like disingenuous to be like, oh, I want to understand you. It's like, no, like, let me truly understand what you're going through, because I know that this isn't your, like, your story. Like, this isn't who you are on like a soul level, you know?
Right. Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, because yeah, it's just really important to recognize like all the ways we fall into trying to change other people, and we try to like bring them, like make them more like me and whatever. And again, all good intentioned, but it's really not even about that in the end. Like, I just imagine how different things would be and would have turned out and will be in the future when we really just stop making it about like, oh, I need to change you and you need to come over to this opinion, and making it more that true understanding, which is like, I think curiosity becomes very innate to people when they have that sort of settled sense of self, and they're like, I would like to actually just understand this person purely just because it's interesting, and because I'm this little blip of consciousness that wants to learn about itself. So let's just do that through this other person that's going to be a mirror for me, right? Or that's going to show me another wave in the ocean of consciousness. And that again is so, it's hard to do, but that's the whole point of why we're here, is I think to again and again disentangle ourselves from the illusions of separation, from the illusions of black versus white and good versus evil, right? The yin and yang is a freaking cohesive circle for a reason, and the light has a bit of dark and the dark has a bit of light. There's a reason why that is such a sacred image. It's because that is us. We all have that within us. And that kind of speaks to like understanding even the illusions of perceiving darkness, and that, again, like that divine order of understanding. A lot of times what we view as good or bad is an illusion. It's not real. And there's a fun story that there's a great Alan Watts tells this story. It's like one of those like Zen Chinese proverbs, and he basically, it's a long story. It's a short story. It goes like this. It's basically like this farmer has a horse, and the horse runs away one day. And so all of his neighbors say, oh, that's so horrible. I'm so sorry. And he says, maybe. That's it. He says, maybe. Okay, whatever. That's fine. The next day, the horse comes back because it ran off, and it comes back with 7 other horses. And so all the neighbors say, wow, that's amazing. Like, that's great. And the farmer says, yeah, maybe. And then the following day, the son is trying to tame some of the wild horses. And so he's riding on the horse and he falls off and he breaks his leg. The neighbors say, oh my God, that's horrible. I think you can see where I'm getting at, but I'll wrap it up. The next day, the military comes into town to draft people, but the son gets skipped because his leg is broken. The townspeople say, wow, that's amazing. And so the whole point is, you see that you cannot always discern what is good and bad, and that there's also like this whole line of consequences afterwards that can go either way. And so the farmer saying maybe is really just addressing to say, almost like, it just exists. It just is, like, it just happened, and that's it. And we keep living, right? And I find it so powerful to remember that, because again, it's kind of trusting and surrendering to that balance, right? Whether it's a balance or a duality or like a cause and effect that kind of evens itself out over time. That's really important, is to know, again, you can stay in that maybe state by just seeing the news or whatever happens as, okay, this is existing. All right, let's keep going. Like, this doesn't really, need to affect me on a level that I'm all of a sudden attaching my entire sense of security or self to this thing outside of me.
Right. And I think it's important, like, I've heard that story too. That's one that my coach uses a lot, and it's so powerful every time I hear it. To discern also that just because you're not labeling something as good or bad doesn't mean that you become just like observant in a way that you're not doing anything about it. To not fall into the emotions and the story around something being quote unquote bad, and just instead just see it as it is, and then to make the shift from that place. And this is exactly what I shared in the solo episode about acceptance, bringing you to that level of neutrality, because you can't make any changes when you're down in the lower vibrations, in the anger, the guilt, the shame, or whatever it is, the frustration, the hatred, the divide. We have to really just have that neutral sense of feeling. And that can be difficult because it is hard to sometimes see how dark the darkness is in society, and to feel like the maybe type of attitude towards it. And to just be like, yeah, and so it is. Like,
yeah, it's hard for sure. Yeah.
But it is a practice, and it has really helped me to just understand that there truly is an order to everything, and we just can't see it because we're so in it. But to just zoom out, that was something I wrote down from my notes of listening to the podcast with Marianne. Important to see the time we are in from a wider perspective as a really big shift in consciousness. So what we were alluding to at the beginning of the episode of this being our dark night, don't fall into the traps of just like sinking into the anger and the frustration. Rise above it, be neutral, and then like do what your heart is telling you from that.
Right. Yeah. And that's the whole point, is this still is about like, you can take action and go be, the activist that you want to be to help bring, light into the world. Like 100%. This does not mean that you turn into this like passive person that doesn't do anything. Right. And the whole point, I think, is this is like, you can view the idea of tuning into the light, to being heart-led, to raising your vibration, as basically giving yourself a new updated software. And so then when you go out into the world and you're in your workplace and you want to speak up about something that you care about, you are coming at it from a different place. That's what this is about, is yes, go. And if you are really passionate about something and you really believe in a cause, or you really believe that there's this issue that exists in the world, 100%, you should be spending, like, I think it's incredibly important to try to align your life to your values and to make changes in your world that you think are important, starting with you, right? But the problem is, so many people skip that step. So many people just stay reactive and angry and frustrated and resentful, that's the energy they take out to go make change. And that's why they are met with so much frustration, or that's why they're met with almost like the solutions don't actually feel right and don't work, because they're coming from that place. Versus updating the software, updating the approach, means that by all means, go out and create the world that you are seeking by creating it first within yourself. And that's the key. That's the action that suddenly changes everything, because it's from a place of love.
Yeah, I think with that, we can talk about some actionable steps that we can all do. Because what you just said is definitely one that I would list out, is to focus on being responsive instead of reactive, to focus on regulating your nervous system, especially if there is going to be more waves of lockdowns. And I'm not saying that to induce fear. I'm saying that to just be cautious of what could come. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen, but to focus on regulating your nervous system and to not just sink into a state of fear, so that you can respond instead of react. And then when you're in rooms full of people that have different ideas than you, approach talking to them, if you're wanting to talk to them about these subjects, from a place of understanding. And it's funny, it's not even that will also help you alleviate the stress and the pressure that you may feel otherwise. It's to also give them the opportunity to not be reactive on their part. Because when you
Mm.
approach someone with understanding and compassion and really just ask, oh, I'm so curious, like, what's making you feel that way? Or like, I'm curious, like, what brought you to that decision? It gives them the opportunity to be like, wait, I don't have to fight right now. I can just actually
Mm.
respond with what feels true to me. And you may even give people the opportunity to tap into their own sense of self for the first time ever, because people are
Yeah.
so used to just fighting, right? Like,
Yes.
so yeah, I feel like those are two things that I would definitely say that we can all start to focus on. Did you have any others that are top of mind? I know we made a list on this little notes. I'll see what else.
Yeah, I think something that really is coming up is just this effort and the effort to remember and embody the fact that you are free. You are a free human being. You are free by the virtue of existing. And we forget this because we become at the whims of our dysregulated nervous system, of fear, of whatever's happening outside of us, that we forget how much agency we have over our own life. And it's so easy and so seductive to fall into the victimhood, to blame other things, to blame circumstance, and to just chip away at the idea that you are free. And yes, there are times when you don't feel like it, when it seems like the odds are stacked against you, when you're facing some real shit in your life. It doesn't change the fact that, I promise, you are a free human being. And the more that you choose to live by that, the more that you do not fall into essentially conforming or complying with things that do not make sense or are not right or are not actually correct for you, for the world, for whatever it is. So this also feels tied to the idea of taking care of yourself, which is what we're saying. It's like, eat healthy, honor your body, move your body, work out, breath work, engage in intellectually stimulating activities, like sharpen who you are as a person so that you are truly strong and capable of embodying all of these ideas, right? Of the next time that somebody tries to enforce their will upon you because they are whatever, right? Whatever person, entity this is, you're free and you get to make a decision, right? And we got so scared of what would happen to us because we fell into the groupthink, we fell into the mass formation psychosis that happened, where we just completely abandoned the truth about who we are, and the fact that so much of the authority that exists in the world today is based on illusion. It is not real. So much of the time, you do not actually have to do the things that certain people are telling you to do. And this is the exact way that you stay empowered, that you become a free person. And no one's saying it's easy. It's actually really fucking hard and scary and very confronting. And yes, there are consequences, but those consequences don't mean that you are not still free and an empowered individual.
Right. It's like to not view, let's say, like the vaccine or the government as like the center of your universe. Like, you are the center of your universe.
Yeah.
Take that visualization of just like you rotating around the government or a vaccine and start to switch it to you being in the center and you being the empowering individual that gets to make the choices in your life. And
Yeah.
obviously there's like law that comes into play here.
Yeah, but yes, for sure, I'm not advocating for like blatant, I don't know, this can go down a whole rabbit hole of like understanding our inherent freedom as human beings, even in like this democracy in the United States. And it's probably a topic for another time, but I don't know. Things got really fucked up during COVID to the extent where people were doing things that were not enforceable by the law. And I just know, like, I look to, things that Martin Luther King Jr. would say during that time when they were fighting against um, such clear erosion of morals, that it was, acceptable to leave out a person because of their race. And he would say, we have a moral obligation to like disobey. what is happening. And I'm not trying to, yeah, basically, like, everything I say, guys, I just want to make this clear because this is my own mind coming in because of like how much I'm thinking about all the angles, that like everything is up to a discussion, and I still want to let myself say these points that are more difficult to say and are a bit confronting for me to say how I feel about these things. But honestly, if we get to a point in society, and we've seen this happen time and time again, where everybody is just conforming and following along because they think it's okay, that is how we lose out and the darkness wins and takes over, right? And I'm not trying to make it into a fight, but it's like just understanding that, ask questions about it. Like, don't just accept, oh, it's mandated, so I have to do it. Like, maybe it's not actually legal for that to happen. Maybe if enough people just didn't do what the government is saying that you have to do based on false evidence, based on false science, right? Then those things wouldn't be normal. They wouldn't be acceptable. But if we all just take it at face value and don't think about it, don't question it, then yeah, like it becomes normal and people think that you're freaking a terrorist for making a decision that is actually very well informed. And again, a lot of nuance there, but yeah.
Honestly, I appreciate you saying
It's
that.
nerve-wracking.
No,
it's
I
really
was
nerve-wracking.
I was even just checking in with like what I was saying there of just like, don't break the law. Like that was definitely fear coming from me of like, oh, this is a podcast that we're putting out, and like we'll have to like give a disclaimer, like we say all this stuff, but don't break the law. But really, what were the fucking laws that were made during that time? It was like ludicrous.
Right. And a lot of it, again, if you actually like, I remember learning about how so much of like what was, mandated and supposedly people were like, oh, it's a law, it's like it actually wasn't. And there were actually laws in place to say that you can't force people to take a certain like medical drug. Like a lot of it was literally illegal, but we made it so normalized that we thought that you had to do it. And again, based on the belief that you're not a free person and that this entity can tell you what to do. And it was not true. Like there is room for nuance and to question and to have a conversation about what those things mean. And that's really my point, is like I'm I'm probably would be regarded as someone on the extreme skeptical side, but that's just because I think it's so powerful to question things deeply so that we get to the bottom of what is the truth and what is it that we actually need to do, or what's the bottom, what's the truth about the situation. And it comes from that I want every single person to be free to make decisions that are correct for you, to tap into your own inner power, to be in touch with your intuition, and to honor yourself over the group, right? When often that group is operating out of fear and doesn't actually care about your individual needs.
And it's fucking painful to do that. Like even during COVID, there were times where I would be in a room full of people and feel like I was such an outcast as I'm like listening to people like make jokes about people that have like certain beliefs. And those were days where I felt so identified with that sort of like, I don't know, just like the identity of being in that type of box. So I'm curious to see if something were to happen with another wave, how I would feel now, just coming from this angle of everything we just spoke about. Because it was definitely tough. Like when you are the one standing up and kind of observing and rising above the group think, you feel fucking crazy. Like
It's really hard.
there were points where I would sit down and I'm like, am I fucking crazy? Or is every single person around me right now like brainwashed? It was, I don't know. It was.
I know exactly what you mean. Like it's very confronting. Like we're so hardwired to not to avoid getting exiled from our group, and it's real. Like even, as I'm saying all of this, the small part of me is like, make sure you say this part too so people don't misinterpret what you're saying. And it's like, also, we're allowed to have this opinion. Like we're allowed to be firm in this viewpoint. And like I need to personally stop making myself like apologize or give caveats for my perspective. Like no, I'm allowed to have this perspective. End of fucking story. And you're also allowed to disagree with me. And I genuinely mean that, because when I see someone's Instagram story that I'm close with and they post something that I completely do not agree with, it's fine. I really I respect that. And so I'm just catching myself too, and saying it out loud, because I think it can help anyone who's going through the same thing of like, this is hard. And even if you look at us and you're like, oh my God, they're so speaking so freely, they're so authentic, that's so amazing. Like, listen, I have a fucking person on my shoulder right now being like, are you sure you want to say that? Like, what if blah blah blah? And it's like, no, you are allowed to have, I'm allowed to have this perspective. I'm allowed to share it. And people are also invited to disagree with it in a loving and open way. But it's hard. It doesn't make it not hard. Like, I'm sweating right now and it's just difficult.
I know. I'm like, are we really going to release this? That's what my mind's telling me. But like, fuck. Yeah. Like, we've been listening to this subconscious rewiring around like releasing the fear of judgment and just like really being authentic to yourself. And sidebar conversation right now, but Bella and I have essentially been like picking up on these tiny ways that we waste so much of our energy spending time perceiving ourselves through the lens of other people to make sure that that lens is feeling good for us. And if it doesn't feel good, then it's like, oh wait, maybe I shouldn't say that, or I shouldn't do that. And if you're listening to this right now and you resonate with that, really let that be a major takeaway from this podcast, to lower the amount of energy that you spend viewing yourself through the lens of another person. Like, by us doing this challenge with each other, I have found that I'm gaining so much more self-respect with what I'm putting out and so much of my own energy to create. And it's just very liberating. Have you been feeling any impacts of it?
For sure. I mean, yeah, just the awareness of all the ways that I was misspending my time and energy has been really eye-opening. And like, yeah, just that habit of putting, putting either like fear of the uncertainty, or like what another person might think, putting that above my own expression or completing my goals, has been really eye-opening, because it just shows me then how I can course correct, and kind of like when that thought comes up, to like bring in the conscious mind to be like, no, like act, like do the thing you want to do. And this exact recording right now it's really cool that it's happening in the middle of us doing this 30-day challenge of the subconscious rewiring, because this is like the hard conversation where you say opinions and perspectives that guaranteed not everybody agrees with, because that's also life. Like, who the fuck agrees with everything that you have to say? That's like not even how it works. But just that it comes up and it really gets in your face of like, wow, I'm literally thinking about like that fear of, oh my God, what if someone who's been listening to the podcast suddenly hears this and they're like, oh, she's a blah, blah, blah. And it's like, this is the energy that is misspent, that does not need to be spent, and that is taking away from me being able to just tell the truth and be open, right? And this is very cathartic, and I think a great experience, at least for me personally, of just like putting into practice of saying it anyway, especially if it's uncomfortable, and it feels like a new level of not beating around the bush, not just like alluding to some elusive example of like, no, this is the example that I'm talking about, and this is my perspective, and I'm putting it out on the table.
Boom.
Deal with it. No, but yeah, it's definitely been powerful.
Also, like, who says that disagreement is bad? I think that's another thing that's so hardwired in us with this separation, this idea of separation. As soon as you separate us, then you're kind of competing with one another. Like, oh, I need to get the most validation, or I need this person to like me, or does this person dislike me? What if we're all just one freaking consciousness broken up, experiencing itself in individual forms, but we're really one, and we are actually here to experience disagreement, and it's a part of our evolution. It is a part of us learning about ourselves. We can't figure out deeper levels of ourself without using each other as mirrors, and what you disagree with in another is actually showing you more about yourself. And not that you're wrong, but to just think about the things that cause disagreement in your life and to not view that as a bad thing. It's just, it is what it is.
Yes, it's honestly, I think it's essential. Yeah. It could be worth it to do a whole, I could do this maybe as, I mean, we could obviously do it together, but a solo on like the art of disagreement, because I remember it was something that helped me so much to learn and like literally study through COVID. Was I read a lot of books on like how to actually have more productive conversations and how to approach people in scenarios where you're coming from such different viewpoints and you're like, how do we even do this? And it's a game changer because disagreement just, it doesn't freak you out anymore. Like for me, I'm like, that's life. That's literally what happens because everybody has a different perspective, because we're all, a little bit different in our experiences, and like no one has the same exact set of events that they've gone through as you. Therefore, you're going to disagree. I disagree with myself on a daily basis. Like it's very normal.
Love that.
So yeah, well, on that note, we'll wrap it up. And guys, we really appreciate you listening, especially if you tuned into this whole episode and you're here at the end. We seriously appreciate you, and we hope you enjoyed. And this is a good one to let us know your thoughts, honestly. Send us a voice note on Instagram or send us a DM. And if you appreciated the conversation, share it with a friend, maybe, especially given, this is going to be quite culturally relevant and tangible. So send it to a friend. And if you enjoyed it, of course, give it a little 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you disagreed with us, don't leave a review. I'm kidding. People do that when they listen to podcasts and the host starts saying things they disagree with. They think that they leave a review about how they disagree with those opinions and put like a lower rating. And I'm like, what, how, what is that even?
Oh,
how?
No. Oh, no.
Why is that a thing? So I don't think anyone would do that to us. But my point is, that's a thing, and it's very bizarre. It's like another classic way of like dangling like approval over people's heads by giving them a bad review for something that they said.
Yeah. Disagree. Unfollow.
Yeah, you're so fucked up for having this opinion that I don't like.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, that was a dense episode that I feel like I just got a weight lifted off of me.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Probably for so many, honestly, over the next few months as we talk about other stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
All right. Good stuff, guys. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Over and out.
Bye.